My stepson accidentally called me mom in front of his biological mother, and she accused me of trying to steal her child. What she didn't expect was for him to defend me. Laura's face turned pale, then red, before collapsing into tears. Other parents stared as she rushed toward the bathroom, shoulders trembling. Jacob looked like he wanted to disappear. I stood frozen. Should I have corrected him in front of everyone? 2 years earlier, I'd married Michael, a divorced father, with the sweetest son imaginable, Jacob. He was 10 when I entered their lives. Quiet, but curious, with Michael's dark eyes and a smile that could soften anyone's heart. I'd been single for years, focused on my marketing career, never really thinking about kids until I fell for both of them. Michael's ex-wife, Laura, lived about 3 hours away. She saw Jacob every other weekend, standard custody terms. Their divorce had been messy. She felt Michael had chosen work over family, while he felt suffocated by her need to control every household decision. Still, they worked hard to stay civil for Jacob's sake. Laura was an ER nurse, dedicated, hardworking, often covering long shifts that clashed with her scheduled weekends. She'd grown up bouncing between divorced parents, never truly fitting in anywhere. Her stepmother had been cold and distant, treating her like an unwelcome reminder of a failed marriage. Knowing her background helped explain her intensity. She'd promised herself that no other woman would ever treat her child the way she'd been treated. At the time, Michael thought she was being overly dramatic. Looking back, it was the first sign that she viewed any stepmother as a potential threat. For me, the most important thing was making Jacob feel secure and loved. I'd heard stories about step-parents trying too hard or not hard enough, so I aimed for balance. I never pushed him to call me anything specific, never tried to replace his mom, just wanted to be a safe, caring presence in his life. But there was one small detail I should have paid more attention to. At every custody exchange, Laura made subtle remarks about Jacob's appearance, his haircut, clothes, or backpack, anything suggesting I'd been involved. "His hair looks different," she'd say, running her fingers through it. "I usually take him to my stylist. She knows exactly how he likes it." Or, "I always buy his sneakers a half size bigger. His feet grow so fast." Her tone wasn't cruel, but her words always carried a quiet message. She knew Jacob better than I did. She'd ask about his homework as if reminding everyone that she knew his teachers personally. When he mentioned enjoying something I cooked, she'd politely smile and then bring up a special meal they'd made together the weekend before. At first, I brushed it off as protective mother instincts. Laura had been Jacob's primary parent, and it made sense that she noticed small changes. I thought she just needed time to adjust to sharing parental roles. But over time, her remarks became sharper. When Jacob mentioned I'd helped him with a science project, Laura immediately reminded him how she'd helped with all his previous ones, and knew exactly what teachers expected. When he talked about a fun recipe we'd tried, she'd recall their old family dinners. It felt like she was drawing invisible boundaries, reminding everyone that she was permanent, while I was temporary. Then, something unexpected happened. Jacob began opening up to me about things he hadn't told Michael: school drama, feeling left out at lunch, friends drifting away, doubts about being smart enough for advanced math. I became his safe space for honest conversations. Maybe because I was new to his life and not tied to old dynamics, or maybe because I was a woman who could discuss things Michael found awkward. Michael was genuinely happy Jacob felt comfortable talking to me. But it also shifted the family balance. I was becoming a more central figure in Jacob's emotional world than most step-parents typically are. When he had nightmares, he'd knock on our door asking for me. When nervous about a school presentation, he'd ask for my help because I made him less anxious than his dad did. He still didn't call me mom then, usually just used my first name or called out when he needed me. But our bond kept growing naturally. I started going to his soccer games, school events, taking photos for Michael when work kept him busy. Other parents often assumed I was Jacob's mother. I'd correct them politely, saying I was his stepmom, though most didn't see much difference. Meanwhile, Laura's comments turned from casual to confrontational. She began asking Jacob detailed questions about our conversations. What did we talk about when Michael wasn't around? Was I giving him advice that should come from her? When Jacob told her I'd helped him understand some topics he was too embarrassed to ask his dad about, Laura called Michael for a 45-minute lecture on appropriate boundaries. She argued that those discussions should happen when Jacob was with her, so she could provide the correct information. Michael defended me, saying kids don't time their questions around custody schedules, and Jacob clearly benefited from having another trusted adult. Still, the tension weighed on him. He became more careful during custody exchanges, trying to prevent another argument. I tried not to get involved. When Laura made passive-aggressive remarks, I stayed polite and neutral. If she questioned my choices, I deferred to Michael, even when it made me feel like a guest in my own home. The tension began affecting my confidence. I started second-guessing everything: photos I posted, bedtime routines, even small treats after school, wondering how Laura would interpret them. Michael noticed and asked if I was okay. I told him that I felt constantly evaluated, unable to be relaxed around Jacob anymore. He was frustrated but cautious, afraid of making things worse by confronting her directly. I tried convincing myself that maybe I was overreacting. But then Laura's questions became constant. She'd text Michael daily asking about Jacob's meals, bedtime, homework, outdoor time, even how often we argued in front of him, or whether I had friends over. At first, Michael responded patiently, thinking her concern was just part of her parenting style. But her questions grew increasingly personal, crossing from co-parenting into surveillance. When I confided in friends, they said it was normal, that blended families always go through adjustment periods. Maybe she'd calm down eventually. But the constant scrutiny made me feel like I was living under inspection in my own home. The breaking point came when Laura began calling Jacob directly, asking about every detail of his day, his meals, his emotions. These calls lasted nearly an hour and left him visibly drained, as though he'd just completed an exam instead of chatting with his mom. I watched him pace the kitchen one evening, phone in hand, carefully describing what he'd eaten and how much homework he'd done before watching TV. When he hung up, he looked exhausted, anxious about whether he'd said the right things. That's when I realized Laura's need for control wasn't just affecting me. It was putting unbearable pressure on Jacob. He felt he had to be perfect so his mother would never doubt how well he was cared for in our home. All I ever wanted was to love this kid and help him feel safe in our blended family. But it turned into a careful dance around someone else's insecurities. The first sign was small but impossible to ignore. After a weekend visit, I found Jacob crying in his room. He'd told his mom that I'd been teaching him basic cooking: scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, simple pasta. Michael and I thought of it as a useful life skill. Jacob enjoyed helping in the kitchen, and it became our special one-on-one time to talk and laugh. But when he proudly told Laura that he could now make breakfast by himself, she broke down in tears. She said she'd always planned to teach him those recipes someday, and now that special mother-son moment had been stolen from her. She told Jacob that certain experiences were meant only for mothers and their children, and by learning from me, he had taken something away from their bond. Jacob was devastated. Through tears, he asked if he should pretend not to know how to make eggs so his mom could still teach him, or if he should stop cooking with me altogether. Imagine an 11-year-old trying to manage adult emotions, feeling guilty for learning and growing, afraid that enjoying our time together meant hurting his mom. When Michael called Laura to talk about it, she flipped the situation around. She said if I truly cared about Jacob's well-being, I'd stay out of special experiences meant for his real parent. The word real stung more than I wanted to admit. The second sign was harder to dismiss. Jacob began asking questions that revealed how confused and anxious he'd become about our family dynamic. He wanted to know if loving me meant he loved his mom less, as if affection had a limit that had to be divided between us. He wondered if he should feel guilty about enjoying our grocery trips or evening walks. He even asked whether I'd still be his stepmom if his parents got back together. Genuinely worried I might disappear if that ever happened. When I reassured him that Michael and I were married for good, he looked relieved, but then quietly asked if that meant his mom would always be sad. These were not the kinds of questions a child should be asking. They showed how deeply Laura's reactions were affecting his sense of security and his right to care about more than one parent figure. The most heartbreaking moment came one quiet Sunday morning while we made pancakes. Out of nowhere, he asked if his mom would be happier if I weren't part of their family anymore, and whether Michael would understand if I moved away to make things easier. This child was considering giving up relationships that brought him joy and comfort, just to stop the emotional conflict around him. Michael was frustrated too, but hesitant to push too hard. He'd heard stories of ex-spouses using parental alienation tactics when they felt threatened and didn't want to risk making things worse. But when Jacob started showing physical signs of stress, stomach aches before visits with his mom, quiet withdrawal before transitions between homes, we knew something had to change. I suggested stepping back a little until Laura felt more comfortable. Michael refused. He said giving in to unreasonable behavior would only teach Jacob that love had to be hidden to keep the peace. He was right. We were trapped in an impossible situation. The third major incident proved we couldn't ignore it any longer. Laura showed up at Jacob's school unannounced to check on his progress during a week he was staying with us. The teacher, confused, contacted Michael since Laura wasn't authorized for visits that week. That's when the school revealed she'd been calling regularly, asking about Jacob's grades, behavior, social life, and even what he said about me or our home environment. The school counselor eventually called Michael out of concern. They'd noticed Jacob was anxious when talking about home life and avoided mentioning me at all, even casually. That's when I realized this wasn't just insecurity. Laura was actively monitoring and questioning his relationship with me, treating our home like something that needed supervision. Michael was furious. He contacted his lawyer about modifying the custody agreement to establish stricter boundaries around communication and school involvement. But before anything could move forward, I found something that changed everything. While organizing Michael's office, I discovered a folder labeled Custody Documents that had fallen behind a filing cabinet. Inside were legal papers I'd never seen, not just the divorce decree, but letters between lawyers from before I'd even met Michael. The documents revealed that during the divorce, Laura had tried to gain full custody of Jacob, claiming Michael's work schedule made him unfit as a primary parent. But Michael's lawyer had countered with claims that Laura showed signs of emotional instability, including possessive and controlling behavior toward Jacob. There was even a psychological evaluation. The evaluator expressed concern about Laura's difficulty allowing Jacob to form healthy attachments with others, and recommended ongoing therapy to address her anxiety and control issues. The report described incidents where Laura became overly upset about normal activities, Jacob enjoying time with babysitters, forming friendships, even bonding with his preschool teacher. The evaluator concluded that Laura viewed any close relationship Jacob had as a potential threat to her role as his mother. There was also a letter from her therapist acknowledging that, while Laura was loving, she struggled with abandonment fears rooted in childhood. Fears that caused her to limit her son's relationships to maintain a sense of control. Michael had never told me any of this. The most recent letter was even more alarming. A message from Laura's lawyer, just 3 weeks old. It outlined a new plan to challenge custody again, this time claiming I was the problem. She intended to argue that I was alienating Jacob from her by encouraging him to see me as a replacement mother figure. The letter listed plans to collect evidence, school testimony, documentation of Jacob calling me mom, and expert opinions about the psychological harm caused when step-parents usurp the role of the biological parent. But the real shock came from a handwritten note attached to the back of that letter. It read, "Lisa doesn't know that Jacob started calling her mom because I told him to. I suggested it during one of our phone calls, hoping she'd be foolish enough to encourage it. Now we have proof she's trying to replace me." I sat frozen, staring at the words. Laura had deliberately told her son to call me mom to build a legal case against me. Every innocent, heartfelt moment, the bedtime calls, the hugs, the Mother's Day card, had been turned into evidence of wrongdoing. My hands were shaking as I photographed everything. When Michael came home, I laid the documents on the kitchen table. "We need to talk," I said. He went pale when he saw them. "Lisa, I can explain." "You knew," I said. "You knew she was manipulating Jacob, and you didn't tell me." Michael looked defeated. "I was trying to protect you. If you'd known, it would have changed how you acted. You might have pulled away from him, exactly what she wanted. So instead, you let me walk around thinking I was building something real while she was setting me up?" "Your bond with Jacob is real," he said firmly. "Maybe she planted the idea, but his love for you isn't fake. Kids don't pretend that kind of attachment." I wanted to believe him, but the trust was shattered. "Why didn't you tell me about her past, about the evaluation?" "Because I thought she'd improved. Her therapist said she was making progress. I hoped that seeing Jacob happy would help her let go. I was wrong," he admitted. I slid the latest letter across the table. "She's planning another custody fight, this time accusing me of alienation." Michael's jaw tightened as he read. "This is insane. Anyone can see we've encouraged her relationship with Jacob." "But all she needs is proof that he calls me mom," I said quietly. That realization hit hard. Every genuine moment had been weaponized. "What do we do now?" I asked. Michael took a deep breath. "We get our own lawyer. We document everything. Her manipulation, the school visits, the emotional pressure, and we pray a judge sees through it. But what about Jacob? I asked. Do we tell him what's going on? No, Michael said immediately. He's 12. He doesn't need to know his mother's been manipulating him. It would destroy him. I understood, but hiding the truth felt wrong too. So we just pretend? We protect him, Michael said. He's a kid. This is not his burden to carry. The next few weeks were filled with legal meetings and strategy sessions. Our new attorney, Patricia, specialized in high-conflict custody cases. After reviewing Laura's history, she shook her head. This is classic parental alienation, but not by you. Laura's manipulating your stepson's emotions for control. She explained that Laura's plan was a common tactic, encouraging a child to blur parental roles, then accusing the step-parent of overstepping. The hard part, Patricia warned, was proving it. Judges often see a child calling a step-parent mom and assume it reflects inappropriate boundaries. We spent hours compiling evidence, texts, school emails, photos, showing how much we'd supported Jacob's bond with his mother. Still, the knowledge weighed on me. Every time Jacob called me mom, I froze. Was it genuine, or was I still part of her manipulation? Michael noticed. You're pulling away from him, he said one night after Jacob went to bed. He can feel it. I don't know what's real anymore, I admitted. Michael shook his head. Look at how he runs to you when he's scared. That's not fake, Lisa. Whatever she started, what you two have now is real. I wanted to believe that, but doubt lingered. The following weekend, after visiting his mom, Jacob came home quiet and uneasy. Mom wants me to stop calling you mom, he said softly. She said it hurts her feelings and makes her think I don't love her anymore. Michael and I exchanged looks. This was exactly what we feared. What did you tell her? I asked gently. I told her I love her and I love you too. That calling you mom doesn't mean she's not my real mom. But she started crying and said if I really loved her, I'd stop. My heart ached for him. No child should have to carry the weight of an adult's emotions. What would make you feel comfortable? I asked. Jacob thought for a moment. I want to keep calling you mom because that's how I think of you. But I don't want to make her cry. Michael knelt beside him. Buddy, adults are responsible for their own feelings. You don't need to change who you love just to make someone else happy. But what if she gets so sad that she doesn't want to be my mom anymore? Jacob whispered. And in that moment, I realized the full damage of Laura's manipulation. She'd created a world where her son was terrified of losing her love just for loving someone else. Jacob had begun to believe that his natural affection was somehow harmful to the adults around him. That's when I made a decision I'd been avoiding for weeks. Jacob, I said, sitting beside him, no matter what you call me, Mom, Lisa, or anything else, it doesn't change how much I love you or how important you are to me. And your mother will always be your mother, no matter what anyone else says or does. He looked uncertain. I added, sometimes adults have complicated feelings about sharing people they love. But that's for us to handle, not you. Jacob seemed comforted, though I could tell he was still trying to keep everyone happy. That night, after he went to bed, Michael and I talked about what to do next. We need to tell him something, I said finally. Not everything, but enough. He's carrying too much guilt over emotions that are completely normal. He needs to know none of this is his fault. Michael hesitated, but agreed. We decided to give Jacob an age-appropriate explanation about why the adults in his life were reacting so strongly to normal family changes. The next day, we sat down with him. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. We explained that when families change, it can take time for adults to adjust to new roles. We told him that his mother just wanted to make sure he always knew she'd be his mom, and that her sadness came from that worry, not from anything he did wrong. We also told him that it's good to have many people who care about him, and that he never had to hide how he felt to protect anyone's emotions. Most importantly, we promised that no matter what happened with custody or court matters, nothing would change how committed Michael and I were to being part of his life. Jacob listened carefully. "So it's not my fault that Mom gets sad when I call you Mom?" he asked. "It's absolutely not your fault," Michael said firmly. "Adults are responsible for their own feelings. You never have to choose between us," I told him. "Love isn't like pizza. There aren't only so many slices to go around. You can love as many people as you want without running out." For the first time in weeks, Jacob smiled a genuine smile. But our relief didn't last long. Laura soon learned that Michael had spoken to his lawyer and immediately accused us of trying to reduce her access to Jacob. She threatened to file for modified custody, claiming I was alienating Jacob from her and that Michael was enabling it. The accusations were completely reversed from the truth. Laura was the one causing alienation by making Jacob feel guilty for caring about me. But she framed my presence as the problem, not her reaction to it. She began contacting people in Jacob's life, teachers, coaches, even parents of his friends, asking if they'd noticed changes in his behavior. She never made direct accusations, just implied concern. Unfortunately, some people believed her. Jacob's soccer coach told Michael that Laura seemed really worried about Jacob and suggested better communication among adults. My own mother even asked if I was moving too fast in taking on a parental role, mentioning she'd heard from someone in Laura's family that I might be crossing boundaries. Even Michael's parents subtly urged us to be sensitive to blended family dynamics and respect the biological parents' feelings. Jacob sensed the growing tension, no matter how carefully we tried to hide it. He started tiptoeing around me, afraid that affection might upset his mother. It felt like I was slowly being erased from his life to calm someone else's insecurity. Then things got worse. Laura hired a family law attorney and officially filed for modified custody. She claimed Jacob's well-being was at risk because of inappropriate parental boundaries. She didn't seek less time for Michael, but wanted to restrict my involvement. I wouldn't be allowed to participate in parenting decisions, and all school communication would go through her as the primary parent. She also requested court-ordered family counseling, arguing that Jacob was suffering from loyalty conflicts and parental role confusion. What began as emotional conflict turned into legal stress, court hearings, lawyer fees, and the threat that my relationship with Jacob could be legally limited because one person couldn't accept that a child can love more than one mother figure. The custody evaluation process was draining. A court-appointed psychologist interviewed each of us, observed interactions, reviewed records, and assessed whether my presence helped or harmed Jacob. I found myself explaining to a stranger why I loved my stepson, how I supported his bond with his mother, and that I'd never tried to replace her. Meanwhile, Jacob had to answer impossible questions. Who he loved more, who made him feel safer, whether he wished I wasn't around. The evaluation found no evidence that I had harmed Jacob. In fact, it stated that he seemed anxious when talking about me, a sign that he'd been made to feel conflicted about our relationship. The court denied Laura's petition and recommended counseling for all of us to support Jacob's relationships equally. But winning in court didn't fix the emotional damage. Then I found something that changed everything. Jacob had left his school journal on the counter. It had fallen open to a page titled, "My Biggest Worry." In his careful handwriting, he'd written, "I'm scared that if I love Lisa too much, Mom won't want to be my mom anymore. But I'm also scared that if I don't love Lisa enough, Dad will be sad and she'll leave like Mom left Dad." He went on to describe how he tried to manage everyone's emotions, showing different levels of affection depending on who was watching. This child was living in constant fear that his love could hurt someone. He was only 11 and already felt responsible for keeping the adults in his life emotionally stable. That realization changed everything about how I saw the situation. Which brings me to the night that forced it all into the open. Jacob's 6th grade science fair. He'd spent weeks working on a renewable energy project we built together. Michael planned to meet us there after work, and I arrived early to help Jacob set up. Laura was already there, speaking politely but distantly. Jacob looked nervous, trying to focus on his presentation despite the tension. I decided to stay in the background, take photos quietly, cheer him on, and avoid any appearance of competition. Everything went smoothly until a judge asked Jacob what inspired his project. Without hesitation, he said, "My mom helped me understand how important renewable energy is," and pointed at me. The word mom hung in the air. Laura's expression went pale, then red. Other parents glanced between us, unsure what to think. Jacob instantly realized what he'd said. His excitement faded, replaced with panic. Laura quietly excused herself and left the room. I followed and found her crying in the hallway. When she saw me, her grief turned to anger. "How could you let this happen? He's my son. You can't just take that away from me." I tried to explain that I'd never asked him to call me Mom. It just happened naturally. But she was too upset to listen. She accused me of undermining her, of stealing moments that belonged to her, of confusing him about who his real family was. She wasn't entirely wrong. Jacob did call me Mom when we were alone. I'd never corrected him because it felt natural, but I never encouraged it or wanted it to happen publicly. I apologized and assured her that she would always be his mother, but my attempts to calm her only made things worse. The confrontation lasted nearly 20 minutes before Michael arrived. Laura demanded that I stop allowing Jacob to call me Mom. To de-escalate, I agreed that I'd ask Jacob to use my first name when his mother was present. Michael didn't like the decision, but we made it through the rest of the evening without further incident. Jacob, however, was quiet and withdrawn, his pride replaced by guilt. Later that night, he broke down crying. "Why do you care more about her feelings than mine?" he asked. "I thought you loved me. Now you're saying I can't even call you what feels right." Michael was angry too, saying I'd validated Laura's accusations and undermined our family. But I kept thinking about Jacob's journal, that little boy who felt responsible for everyone's happiness. Maybe asking him to adjust how he addressed me was the only way to protect him from an impossible emotional burden. The discussion went late into the night, but one thing was clear. We couldn't pretend anymore that Laura's insecurity wasn't affecting Jacob's well-being. The next day, Michael called Laura. He told her he respected her feelings, but wouldn't allow her discomfort to dictate Jacob's relationships. He made it clear that Jacob's choice to call me Mom was his own, and that trying to control it would only create more confusion. He offered to attend family counseling with all of us, but also warned that any further legal actions would be met with firm opposition. Laura initially resisted, but after the custody evaluation, she realized that ongoing conflict would only harm Jacob. She agreed to counseling, though she still disliked the idea of him calling me mom. Therapy was difficult, but productive. Laura acknowledged that her fear of being replaced came from her own childhood experiences and that she had projected those fears onto Jacob. I explained that I never intended to compete with her. I just wanted to care for him in a healthy way. We agreed to be more mindful of each other's boundaries while allowing Jacob to express affection naturally. Most importantly, Jacob learned he didn't need to hide his emotions or protect anyone's feelings. He was allowed to love all of us freely. 2 years later, Jacob still calls me mom sometimes, and Lisa other times. Laura still gets uncomfortable, but she no longer makes him feel guilty about it. Michael and I support Jacob's bond with his mother while maintaining our own. That science fair project, the one that started all of this, ended up winning second place in the district competition. Jacob was proud, and all 3 of us were there to celebrate. We're not a perfect family, but we're functional. One where a child is free to love openly without having to choose sides. Laura will always be Jacob's mother. That will never change. But I'm part of his family too, and I've earned the right to be called whatever feels genuine to him. He calls me mom because he wants to. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next one.